Hey everyone, and welcome back to our channel this week. As we all know, the Black Lives Matter movement and the fight against racism in general is still gaining momentum. There's a lot of information going around about racism, discrimination, and how to respond to it, not just in the US, but anywhere around the world. This can help us reflect and use this knowledge and apply it to other situations. Last episode, we focused on microaggression and racism in the Netherlands.
But racism and discrimination does not know borders. It is also very present in the Arab world, and more specifically in the Gulf region where I am from. So today we decided that we are not only going to talk about anti-blackness in the Arab world, but we will also delve into discrimination against other ethnicities and nationalities and minority groups within the Gulf.
Because I don't know much about racism in the Middle East, I decided to give my space this week to someone who can speak about the issue.
I recruited a friend of mine to join me and talk about his experiences. He is an Arab friend who is not from the Gulf, but he was born and raised in one of the Gulf countries, and his name is Ahmed, and he is right here with me. So thank you for joining, Ahmed.
Yes, it's my pleasure.
And we just want it to be a conversation and a discussion and more like a process where we learn stuff and talk about experiences and also just reflect. Before we start, I thought it would be nice to talk a little bit about the history of where this anti-blackness came from in the Arab world. And I was reading about that, and I realized that it actually goes back to a colonial trauma. Colonials have created a racial hierarchy, which defined white people as the superior and black people as the inferior. So non-black people of color, so the Middle Easterns or people of the Gulf who are considered brown people, realized that advantage, realized that their color being closer in proximity to white could actually be an advantage and aid their own survival. So when people from the same society, when they're all brown, for example, like in the Gulf, discriminate against darker people or lighter people, so the difference in color, just a different shade, this is called colorism, meaning those who are lighter skin have better advantage or see themselves as better or superior than those who have darker skin, even though they're the same ethnicity and from the same country. So what that meant is then it translated into anti-blackness, to reject the blackness and idealize the whiteness. There are a lot of symptoms of that in our society. One symptom is basically the inability to take direction from black people. Also, maybe it's good to say that there are not that many black people in the Gulf region.
It's not the majority, definitely, yeah. Yeah, definitely. It is a matter of fact, of course, that a person would not be of color is the one who's giving orders. And that's what I feel like this notion is right in front of my mind the entire time.
So basically, you're saying like there's actually not even, we don't really see black people in the position of power in the Gulf. So this situation is not even available for us to take direction from
not
black
really.
people.
I don't really right now or even reckon that that this can be the case. I think it would be kind of rejected idea. I would say. I would say it's not really liked an idea that would be liked to, or a common idea.
No, it's not normalized.
It's not really normalized, definitely. Yeah.
One other symptom that I find I've definitely experienced is the beauty standards. And the beauty standards in the Gulf is leaning towards white. So white is pretty, black is not. And I know that because I am, brown, but I have curly hair. My eyes are not blue or green. Yeah. And I do remember growing up thinking curly hair is bad and curly hair is not pretty. And therefore, you have to straighten your hair. If you go to a party or a wedding or you're taking your photos or whatever, your hair has to be straight. You need to, put makeup, lighten your skin a little bit.
Of course, that's not specific to you, of course. That's a very general case. Mostly, they even take a lot of precautions, or they try as much as possible to use not makeup but even like long-term kind of treatments, just so that they can get their facial skin towards a lighter color. Or so it is definitely a common notion that actually when you're white,
Yeah.
that's
It's
more
prettier.
beautiful.
You're kind of aiming to be that. Like,
Yeah.
that's the beauty
That's
you
your
want
aim.
to be. There are definitely jokes that are being said, like, dung on the sun, you'll get burnt, you'll get, like, darker, as if that's a bad thing, you know? We have these jokes...
Being thrown around just
making-
randomly, yeah.
Yeah, you make fun of people. It's like, oh, he's burnt, and like, you know, don't make fun of him. You're gonna be like him if you go out and get burnt. So it's just the idea that black is bad and white is better. So try to be more white than black. And for brown people in the middle, because you're in the middle, you're trying to lean more towards that. You want to be associated with the whiteness, not the blackness. And even though it's unintentional, there's this subconscious, you know, understanding that white is better. And people are bullied in school because, for example, if you had curly hair, like they will make, there's words for that, like, you know, shar, we say abel, or like, you know, muja'ad, you know, which is a bad thing. It's like, you know, your hair is not nice and you get made fun of. And even when you get married, for example, when people talk about a potential wife or like want to praise somebody, like she's beautiful, she's white, or she has light color eyes, and as if that's a thing, you know,
That's
like
a standard.
That's a standard. And that, you know, is, in a sense, it's anti-blackness, whether, you know, you recognize it or not. We are building that and kind of enforcing that in society, that white is better. And then one thing that is the very obvious, I think, symptom is the language and the words that we use when we describe black people, like the word abd, which literally means slave.
Slave, yeah.
Do you hear that happening, like in your...
That's very common, of course. I grew up with hearing such like names, whether it's abd or khal. Black is khal, and abd is slave. So it's kind of leads to the same point. That
but it's a
black,
derogatory term to describe black people. It's not the word for black.
Yeah.
And that's something that has been very, very normalized and has been used in jokes that are circulating, and it's really a description that's attached to black people. So one of the things I just saw not long ago on social media is how much actually TV and cinema, they have this anti-blackness in them, and I was really shocked because I never noticed that when I've watched, you know, TV.
Yeah.
But there are, for example, shots of it's in comedy even, because they make it and present it as a joke, but they show, for example, you know, a black person is scary and people running away from the black person because black is scary, or you have a black face,
or marrying a black woman, or tinting your face black to the entire idea of it is bizarre, of course. Yeah,
and
but
I
it
never
did
noticed.
exist. Yeah, you never notice it. I myself, I've watched these movies and I never noticed any of this until later on. I didn't look at black people as my inferior, for example. But at some point, I did laugh at such jokes or such things being showed in front of me in a movie. Well, I should have not actually, because definitely if a black person is sitting right beside me, he's definitely hurt.
And gonna be uncomfortable.
And he's gonna be uncomfortable. He might throw a laugh or something, for example, just to show that as if he's just has to go it, just to go with the flow, of course, because that's the majority, that's the normalization. But actually, that from the inside, he's definitely hurt about it.
There's one other symptom is also believing stereotypes about black people. And I've definitely heard people around me say or think or just imply that black people is bad news. You know, black is criminal. Black is you know, something that's not wanted. How many times have you heard of people who have been in a position where, you know, their fathers, for example, say, you can't marry a black man.
It's even, of course, that happens, of course. The idea of you being marrying a black man or hearing such thing on a daily basis is definitely like always relating black to the bad thing is something very common, to an extent that they would tell you, for example, also like you have a black day, you're gonna have a black day, for example. That means even like you're gonna have a bad luck day.
Yeah, so the coloring
is even associated with something bad always.
But in the Gulf specifically, there's also a larger issue. Discrimination is also practiced against other minority groups. Where does it come from, and which people or what groups of people you think suffer the most discrimination or exposed to that in the
Of
Gulf?
course, in the Gulf, you have a lot of expats, but mainly I would say, of course, Indian and Pakistanis who would come in lower kind of labor as the
Labor workers. and
labor
like-
workers. Yeah, I would say not. They classify it as a lower thing, but it's, of course, it's not. The way the treatment happens or the way they do treat these people is just very unacceptable. They make them overwork as if they are not even human. Sometimes they call them names. Mainly what leads to this is their look upon them. They look
You get
up
down at
upon-
them, yeah.
you look actually down upon them. And as if you are their superior and you actually have to do this job in this way. And if you don't even, so I've seen many times, many examples in front of my eyes, if they don't perform the job in a certain way up to their expectation, they get beaten.
That would not happen if it was another person from the same country. So if you're,
Exactly. If
it-
if a person from another from the same country who is a local or kind of another like not Indian or Pakistani necessarily, he would be kind of treated in a different way, and he would never be treated in that way. He would be treated respectfully, whatever action he has done. The thing is, I see that people actually, even expats themselves, they do this to the Indians or Pakistanis because they saw that the local did this right in front of their eyes. So I feel like as if it's a sickness, it's something that is passed on, that is normalized, and this reaches to the point of being normalized that you should look down upon these people, and if they don't do the job right, for example, you have all the right to hit them.
No one's holding you accountable.
No one is going to hold you accountable, definitely.
Yeah, that's definitely along the topic that we were talking about the other day, which is modern slavery. Slavery is not necessarily what we recognize what it was back in the day as history. There's different forms of slavery now, and modern slavery is definitely one of the problems that exist in the Gulf, which is what you said, not just the labor workers, but we have the household helpers that live with you and help with the cleaning the house and with the children, and
that's a very common thing, of course.
It's a very common thing. Every house has a helper, and mostly
at least one or two.
They have a driver, a chef. If you're rich, they don't have their freedom. Their freedom is taken away from them. They're belonging to the house. They don't have their passport. They can't take days off whenever they want. They can't travel whenever they want. They're worked long hours, and
it's non-stop basically, actually.
Yeah, that's also called the Kafala system that we have a problem with and needs to really change in the Gulf.
Let's be honest, how many of these actions don't surface to unless someone films it, unless someone has to document it, and then maybe an action, if it surfaces up gets to the surface, people would act upon, or authorities would act upon it.
Because usually no one would believe the worker, and there's no way to guarantee the rights of the helper, whether it's the person in the house or your worker. So it's really up to the locals' good faith and good morals to treat their workers right. And that's part of a bigger problem that really, it needs to be systematically changed. You went to school in the Gulf.
Oh yeah.
You're not from the Gulf, but you actually are born and raised there. So you even mostly speak like you're kind of one of them because you've learned everything there. So, but you still say that you had either experienced yourself some, bullying or microaggression is what I want to call it, and have seen other people also experience it. Tell me, give me examples.
When you talk about school, this is a very sensitive thing because it does have a great impact on your childhood, because being exposed to such bullying or microaggressions on a daily basis, whether it's your accent, whether it's your traditions, whether it's your food, all of such things, and calling names.
Like what?
For example, they would say, they would even call with nationalities, يا المصري, يا السوري, يا اللبناني, يا الأردني.
As if it's a bad thing.
As if it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
And then the others have to call also names, of course. They reply with names. Later on, they would say like, يا البرياني, all of these names. And this is, of course, I'm kind of like not mentioning the bad, of course, namings or the bad mimickings that happens. This is just like right on the surface. And you would be actually watching what you would say so that you don't really get or being made fun of, so you keep watching and being self-conscious about whatever you would say. it's definitely contagious. You find also other expats calling the other expats names and making fun of each other's. So it's not only about the locals actually. It becomes
it's a power play
system.
now.
Yeah, exactly.
Whoever feels a bit more powerful practices it against the less powerful or the more vulnerable.
In their own point of view or their own perspective, definitely.
Yeah.
Which becomes, of course, not a healthy environment
Yeah.
for you to grow in as a child.
Not just in school, but they go back and maybe their parents
Yeah.
practice similar things, maybe unintentionally.
Definitely.
For example, like saying jokes about different nationalities,
for
like
example, yeah.
when we refer to an Indian as an
Yeah.
idiot, you know, like
Yeah.
what are you, an Indian? Basically, like, are you an idiot? In Arabic, like shfik Hindi
Yeah,
ma tifham.
yeah.
You told me that
Yeah, and also like for me, like it gets to the point that as you said, it gets contagious. That at some point I would say, I have said like, do you see a red spot between, for example, my eyebrows? And that was, of course, referring to the Indians. I've become part of that contagious society of that part of like this sickness. I really call it sickness because it is really contagious and it's really bad. It's really unhealthy.
there are a lot of jokes going around, and you hear this, you know, an Indian and an Egyptian and a Pakistani walk into the I don't know what, and it's these very either racist or discriminatory jokes that are meant to feed into the stereotypes.
It's just stereotypes made,
but
it doesn't really touch reality, of course, and it gets to the point that it is being, of course, hurting to other people, definitely.
It's important for us to look at, you know, how did we contribute to the problem, and I've definitely also been part of the problem before. And when you're surrounded by people in a society where it's really normalized, and people might not even realize that's offensive because they think that's a joke, it's normal, you know, everybody says it, no one really gets offended, but that's not for you to decide because you're not the one being offended, you're offending other people. And if you make it a joke and continue to do that, you've kind of created a system, what you said, like a sickness that becomes normal when it's actually part of a bigger problem.
Because you're totally unaware of what you're saying. You can't stop it anymore. It's just...
So the first point, you have to acknowledge that there's a problem.
Definitely.
To be able to fix it.
And we were part of the problem.
And we don't realize that because there's really not that much conversation happening between locals in the Gulf and these minorities, because the relationship is always a power play. The relationship is always a superior and an inferior. So there's not going to be a conversation where that person who, if they're Pakistani or Egyptian or Syrian, they're never going to be able to say to their employer or boss, listen, this is very offensive to me. They're not in that. They're in a position where they are at the mercy of their employer or at the mercy of the locals. And this is already a problem because we cannot have this equal conversation. It's not equal. The field is not leveled to begin with.
Salaries, for example, based on your nationality. If you are for example, an expat and you are, for example, a European, you're going to get the most highly paid, of course, salary. Of course, right after the local. And then right after, for example, Johnsen from, I don't know, the Arabs, for example, whether it's Jordanian, Lebanese, or Egyptian, they kind of get the same salaries. But then with the same, by the way, I'm referring to the same job. I'm referring to the same job or the same role or the same job description. But you being an Indian, then you're expected to be actually lower paid. Whether you're Indian or Filipino, for example. I've talked to many of my, of course, Indian or Pakistani friends. They already go on interviews expecting such thing already. So it's already normalized into their minds that because of their nationality, they are not gonna get this equal treatment. When you talk to people about it, they say, because they can't talk Arabic. Well, of course, I would understand if maybe a job description requires you to talk Arabic. But most of the jobs right now, especially in the Middle East, most of them, or the Gulf especially, English is the main language where everyone can communicate actually in English.
But also, if they're hiring a European and the European is getting more paid, the European also can speak Arabic. So either you're going to treat all non-Arabic speakers the same.
Exactly. It doesn't make sense. It's totally illogical. Some of the work announcements, for example, asking for employees just Indian or just Filipino. You should not ever mention an ethnicity or a nationality. You should just say, I want, for example, with such skills.
So somebody who speaks this language.
Yeah, exactly, someone who speaks such language, but not just like right up and says like, yeah, a Filipino or an Indian.
So the language also, the language matters, but we're also now talking about a system where the procedures are already discriminatory against expats.
It's way beyond the language.
Deeper.
It's something deeper than the language. For example, I was born and raised in the Gulf, but I never had the chance actually of... I'm still renewing my visa, I mean my residency. I don't even get the citizenship or even a permanent residency.
You're not eligible
You're
for
not
actual
eligible.
citizenship.
I'm still
or
not
resident-
eligible for residency or even citizenship.
So that's basically, it's us versus the other. You're always going to be the outsider.
Definitely, you're gonna stay in the outsider. Whatever, I'm sure I definitely relate to that Gulf country more than my own country. They would tell you, yeah, because your loyalty is probably towards your home country. Well, my home country is the country that I was born and raised in.
Yeah. Black people in America or minorities everywhere, you hear that go back to your country sentence, and you're like, but this is my country. This is where I'm from. They've studied there, they've worked there, they've built their relationships there.
And they contribute, of course, to the community. They contributed to the economy. They contribute to everything.
Everything they did is for that country.
Exactly.
Yet they can still not be part of this country, and they're still looked at as people who are not from here, and you're never going to be part of us. Now we've talked about that, we've identified some problems, and we also recognize that we at some point were part of the problem, and that's why a conversation like that is very important. How do we have these conversations? How do we confront each other, our families, our friends, to make sure that we're discouraging, this kind of language, this kind of mindset?
You have to come to the realization that it does exist, and then you have to admit it and say, okay, we should really stop it. And of course, that's gonna take a while, but as long as we have this in mind and we should really take the next step, I think that's what we should start doing. We should not make these jokes. We should actually even start from school, because I'm sure most of the point of view is built, or your perspective is built since your childhood. We should evade any discrimination in front of them is one of the main things, or the main factor that we should really start from.
Many times people associate racism with violence, physical violence.
Physical violence, yeah.
And as long as you don't see somebody being beaten, you said you've seen somebody, beaten, and you've mentioned that example as a very clear example.
Yeah.
Somebody else might have not seen that, and therefore they don't think that there's a problem.
Yeah.
And what's important to realize is that racism and discrimination does not have to necessarily be physical violence. It's also verbal, emotional, and mental violence. It's microaggressions, it's your language, it's your jokes, it's your demeanor, it's how you use your power. And once we realize that, then we can slowly change that mindset.
We have a lot to do, of course, in that sense, that we should, in many senses actually, that we should really take action. Because also we should not just ride the wave about George Floyd
and Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Well, it's important.
Not just like ride the wave at the beginning and stop at some point.
Continue.
We should really continue. The wave should really just keep going on, because
it's not a wave.
It's not a wave.
It's a
exactly.
reality.
It's reality that we face every single day. It's something that we have to stop.
What's happening in America, we can all relate to.
Definitely.
There are Black people everywhere. There are people of color everywhere. And it is positive that you see people in the Middle East and in the Gulf recognize the Black Lives Matter movement and actually speak up for it, and
Definitely.
they support it. Now the next step, what's important is support that, but try to look at your own
Reflect
society
on them.
and see
reflect on our society.
what problems we have that are not applicable to America.
Exactly.
We need to fix our societies first as well. And if you support Black Lives Matter, or you do stand up against racism, it means you have those values to begin with.
Exactly.
Expand on them, use that, and try to recognize the problems in other aspects of society as well. With that said, we're ending our episode. Thank you so much for joining. Below this episode, you're going to find some accounts of Arab activists who share their knowledge and raise awareness about discrimination and racism in the Middle East and in the Arab world, so feel free to follow them. And if you have other suggestions, you can also put comments and tell us your thoughts, your experiences, who you think we should follow, and subscribe to our channels, follow us.
Thank you for listening to us, and tune in next time.